Hey everybody, welcome back to the Skillist Podcast. I'm Matt Corradino, Brad Salon over there in Vermont. We are headed to every other week for our podcasts because it's our busy season. So still going to be putting out the content, just not quite as regular. And today, what are we talking about, Brad? What are we talking about today?
Tracking the signs.
Signing the tracks? Ooh.
Exactly.
Tracking. It's interesting
the
to
shit things leave behind.
Well, yeah, the shit things leave behind, literally. It's interesting. It's interesting that we feel the need to categorize sign differently than tracks, because it's just tracks is just various surfaces and I guess different orifices when you're thinking about doo-doo. But yeah, so yeah, I think that tracking is generally under practiced by people who start to get into tracking. I don't know. What do you think about that? I think it's overlooked because it's not as blatant as a track.
Yeah, which is really a shame because it's the most valuable in a lot of ways. You can get so much information off of a landscape if you're comfortable IDing the sign on that landscape, in terms of knowing what animals are there and in what volume, how many animals per acre to expect. Those things to me are mostly done by sign. And so for people who don't know what the definition of sign tracking is, it's everything but the tracks themselves. So hair, scat, feeding sign, trails, bedding, kill sites, and feeding is a huge world where you could have herbivore feeding that is different kinds of gnawing or chewing or removal of plants, and then it could be kill sites, it could be middens. There's all sorts of different types of sign. It could be claw marks on trees, nests, dens. There's just so many different little categories. But if you become comfortable with all of that, it's much more useful because it's not substrate or weather dependent, and it allows you to judge are there animals active in this area, what species are there, and how much of them do I expect to see. So as far as hunting, trapping, survival, it's way more useful than very specific clear print ID tracking.
The reason why I say that it's under practiced is for I guess my point isn't necessarily that it's under practiced, but I find it interesting that we put it into a different category. So maybe we put a different type of study to it, maybe not quite as much time deciphering it. The other reason why I say that is that it's the majority of the tracking that you actually do, and right. It can feel easy in a way, it's very specific. A lot of the sign that animals leave behind is very, very specific. Whereas a track can be distorted by substrate that it's on. Obviously, a totally clear print is a different thing, but even a completely clear print can be distorted by the way the animal moves. Generally, sign is pretty indicative of exactly what the animal was doing. One of the ways that we teach tracking with clear print and with gait patterns is to have people crawl through what the animal was doing. And I never really thought about asking people to crawl through what was happening for the sign. I mean, I'm imagining some people are going to be squatting, pretending that they're squirrel pooping, but I wasn't necessarily thinking about poop with that one. But I guess it's just interesting that we categorize it as two different things. And I suppose it is in a certain way seeing somebody's that somebody grabbed something is one type of track, and then having the ID fingerprint to go off of is another level of tracking. And I guess sign tends to be looked at as this larger scale kind of thing, a larger scale disturbance to the baseline, which I think helps because, like I said, you're doing most of your tracking is sign tracking. And especially for speed, you might need to know an individual animal, right? An animal you shot and injured, and we're following, a person you were trying to find, whatever reason you might be out there tracking, and you have that ID on an individual print. But then following the sign tracking and like being able to read the landscape, you're going to find that person, you're going to find that animal much faster based off of the sign than you are on clear prints.
Right.
Definitely so a lifelong study for sure.
Yeah, and I think like learning to see disturbance or notice when something's amiss, like, oh, that plant doesn't grow like that, it's missing things, and then inspect the missing spots, or like, we have nip twigs a lot here, which is the red squirrels will feed on the little growing cones that are on the bottom side of the conifer branches, and they'll nip the end of the twig and then chew those pieces off and then throw the nipped twig end down, so that you just get this like littered area, and it's diffuse because it's happening high up and then dropping to the ground. But on fresh snow, it stands out really obvious. Like, the tree isn't self-pruning all these green ends of the twigs. And so most people, I'll walk them right into the middle of a huge patch of it, and I'll be like, there's a sign of abundant feeding here. Can anyone see it? And everyone's just looking around. No one notices the nip twigs. And then you point it out to them, like, why would the tree shed a green tree end with a clean cut, And they start picking them up and looking at them, and it's very obvious. And then they start seeing them all over the place, and then you can tell in the winter especially, like, oh, this is a red squirrel's feeding zone, because it leaves like an obvious ring of feeding sign. And so it's like noticing the disturbances and then learning the specific sign that goes with is really big. I think also, like, I invite folks to really try and think about like your house and what sign do you leave behind. Like, can you find your own hairs on your pillow? Can you find your right? Sure, we think of it as gross.
Some
but it's
people
just
very
sign.
Easily. It's just my sign. I'm just leaving my sign behind.
Or like when you look at
that's not dirty laundry that I left on the floor. Just leaving some signs for you to follow.
It's just human sign.
You were interested in tracking me.
That's not a pile of shit in the living room. That's just scat. It's just a scat pile.
No, I don't need to change the sheets. I'm just scent marking. That's some sign right there. Are you kidding me?
But like, you notice your stairs, and you look at like the treads are worn in the middle of the stairs because nobody walks up the stairs on the very edge.
Well,
and that's
now
a trail.
I'm going to start doing that to leave a different kind of sign just for you, Brad.
Right. But people can recognize, like, they see, hopefully they clean their houses, and hopefully they see the sign they leave, or their kids or spouses leave behind. It's the same thing in nature. You're just looking for, like, what didn't get cleaned up by the weather, essentially. Yeah.
Well, the way you were telling that story about how walking people through that area, and you're saying like that there's abundant sign of feeding in that area, right? So immediately, like, people don't see it, and that's because I think it affects our brain in such a different way to see the sign versus seeing the tracks. Like the tracks, like because we make tracks everywhere we go, and it's easy to see them, like the footprints that is. In clear spaces, like that tends to hit our brain in a certain way and kind of tells the story of the animal, versus I think sometimes for sign, like we're not necessarily going to feel the same feeling from seeing like places in the spring where there's poplar trees and you get big balls of perfect tinder, which is like the squirrels making their nests, and like they're not perfect builders, they're dropping stuff, and you'll find places where they've dropped like perfect tinder bundles, right? Like that's not an action that we do as much, so we're not necessarily always gonna fit into reading that, or like it's not going to hit our brain in the same way as seeing a clear print will. And maybe that's why people spend a little bit more time. I don't. Maybe I'm misreading that. I do feel like people spend a lot more time with the gait patterns and with the clear print. I feel like that's because that's a large part of the way that one of the large parts of the ways that people teach tracking.
Yeah,
and
that
maybe
also
it's
might
like
be
sexier. Is that what it is?
It could also be the bias from teaching at Tracker, where it's really focused on those things. because, like some of the tracking that I've engaged with is more through the naturalist world. And in that respect, if you're like a scientist out doing a field study, it might be all sign that you're looking for, or like a majority of looking for sign.
Yes, but I don't know how that goes though. I think you don't do you not think that people, when they think of tracking, that they like don't immediately? I'm talking about people who are lightly experienced or not experienced at all, versus people who are experienced. Like, just when you say tracking, don't you think a lot of people maybe think of more like clear print and gait patterns than they do of sign? Or maybe I'm reading that totally wrong.
Yeah, I mean, if people don't have any experience, I think they just think about trailing. And then if people gain a little experience, yeah, when you open a field guide, the first chapter is always clear print ID.
And not just that, but like tracking guides for so many years had been based around clear print identification. I mean, yes, there's some great sign tracking manuals out there, and all of those old school tracking guides mention sign in the description of the animals, but it seems to me like that's a lot of how it's been passed down in our modern times, is through clear print more. And I get that, because that's like the excitement of like finding the animal, but like nothing can be clearer of an indication of a specific animal than the sign. It could arguably be more clear most of the time than a lot of clear prints, considering how rare clear prints are.
Right, and how specific some sign can be. Like if it's herbivore browsing on low plants at a 45-degree angle, yeah, it could be like several different lagomorphs or rodents. Like it could be rabbit, hare, or rodents. But, other than sign like that, like it can be so specific, whether it's like beaver sign or porcupine sign, or, like a scent mound from an otter, or scats can be really specific, or, like certain types of kill sites where you can see the distance between the teeth that were crunching on the bones or ripping out feathers, or are the feathers sheared, or are they plucked. Like there can be really specific parts of the sign where you're right, it can be more of a easy tell. And I think the other thing that's cool about it is it lasts. Like if I am teaching a tracking class and it pours rain the day before the class, or it snows the morning of the class, right, then I can rely on going out and still finding sign. So yeah, I mean, and then I'm gonna crawl under a bridge with the class and look at the clear
still look for the cool looking clear prints, because you want to be absolutely sure.
Yeah, what else? But you want to have them have that experience of like, how do you work through the questions to get yourself from like, here's a clear print in the mud, to, oh, it's probably one of these two animals or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I also love how, I like that it seems to like hit my awareness or hit my brain in a different way, because it really does. Like when I'm looking at clear prints versus looking at sign, it's like there's a different. I feel like there's a different mechanism that I'm using as I'm following that animal, but it leads one so easily into the other. Like if it's fresher sign, like seeing a sign from a distance, for instance, like in when the rut just before it starts really popping off and you're starting to see the scrapes and the rubs happening, like seeing those from a distance, knowing what's going on, and then like using those to like check on my like individual print analysis, like finding those harder tracks by starting with the sign, right? You see the sign, the tracks have to be there somewhere. They have to be, even if you can't see them clearly when you're first looking at the ground, in some of those more difficult substrates. It's like you need that little hair, so to speak, to get you to feel confident that the prints that you're seeing on the ground are the animal you think it is. But like sign goes really hand in hand with that really well. You can see the sign if it's fresher, it's going to easily lead you to those individual tracks. And it can be vice versa too, following an animal on clear print. But I love how it feels so different, but it's still the same art of tracking. I also really love how sign like really takes you through the seasons. It's like so specific to that season, whether that's feeding, whether that's, bedding, whatever it is, like.
Yeah, even scat, like the difference in deer scat in the winter here versus the summer.
Mm-hmm.
That scat in the winter looks like ground up sawdust, or like sawdust that's been made into a pellet. Mm-hmm. Versus in the summer, it's most likely going to be really fine plant, fiber. It's going to be way darker, mm-hmm. way more moisture, and often the pellets will be dimpled and all stuck together in a big clump.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty easy when you start finding lots of deer scat to be like, oh, this is a winter bedding area. I'm not going to like put my hunting effort here. Mm-hmm. Or like, oh, this is like summer grouping. I'm not going to put my effort here. Try and find that like changeover scat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to love tracking. I spent a lot of time in wetland areas and tracking any animals that use toilets, like frequent the same spot to go to the bathroom. And it's super cool because you could pick through the seasons. You could see like the berries and, well, I should say seeds. Like I would find a lot of greenbrier seeds in the wintertime. And then I'd pick back through and like into the fall and into the summertime to be a lot of crab scat, and then picking earlier on would be like, obviously a lot of plant material mixed in throughout all of it, but like a lot of insects in the springtime. And it was really cool to be able to have like a calendar for when that animal used that spot. Yeah, I mean, I guess I get it. Sometimes people don't want to poke around in poo, but it's like there's so much information in that doo-doo.
You just have to use your left hand.
You gotta. That's true. That's being the one that I shake with all the time.
And then, yeah, I think the other thing about sign is it can be a little daunting. Like clear print, you're like, okay, I found this print. I go through this list of questions. I look in the book. I try and figure out which one it is. If you find like a chewed on branch in the woods, it can feel a little bit, hard to narrow down. Like it's not keyed out diagnostically the same way. And so I was thinking about like what to say for folks in terms of learning sign tracking. And I think first things first is like find someone better than you at tracking and go tracking with them just to help to open the door. And then they'll like help you to see what you should even be looking for. And then you can start to bury your head in a book and really look at like two main things. One, like especially the newer Elbrock books have just like an amazing array of varied sign in detailed pictures that when we were learning tracking, none of the books even came close to.
I just mentioned it. It might be a little drawing, which I'm not against drawings, but it was always like a sidebar to the tracks and the track measurements.
Right.
All those
Resendez's book
guides
was decent for the Northeast. It had some decent sign pictures, but yeah, there wasn't anything like the comprehensive tome that now exists. And
it's interesting that you say that too, because you mentioned like going out with somebody to see like what there is to see. And I think that's such a huge thing, like just, if you don't have a manual for the area you're going to, just like studying what animals live in that area and just starting with that, like that can lead you to, anybody can imagine, okay, I know this is a certain type, okay, a woodchuck, whatever, like it's an herbivore, arguably an omnivore, because they do eat some small, they do eat a lot of invertebrates, but anyway, like it's an herbivore. That there's 5 or 6 different herbivores, and you can like kind of extrapolate back from what of what the species list in that area, like reasonably quickly.
Right, and then taking it a step further than that and being like, not just who's here, but like the more you can know about how they live, the more likely it is you're going to be able to interpret the sign that you find. And so like if you can watch a video of a black bear climbing a tree, then when you find claw marks in a tree and you're wondering if they're black bear, you'll be like, oh, there's 5 and 5 in terms of toes, so I should expect to see like 5 or 4 claw marks. And then, I'm going to be able to reach around, or like you watch them reach around and grab the tree and with their fronts, and then their rears are pushing off. and so you've got like a good sense of how they're climbing the tree. You'll know where to look for sign, or like watch a squirrel climb down a tree, or watch, like the way a dog digs versus the way a groundhog digs. Like those videos are out there and available, and like dogs dig a V, like a cut V. Deer scrape and dig in the same way, but like their claw marks are going to look different going in. And just in general, like the more natural history you can have on an animal, and that's where those mammal guides really come in handy, is like every detail you can know about, like when do mammals mate, when do they give birth, what do they eat, where do they sleep, what do I expect to find. Then you start piecing together this enormous puzzle of like, what am I seeing in the field, and then what is the lifestyle of this animal going to lead me to find.
When you were talking about the bear climbing the tree, you made that motion like of as if you were the bear and putting your arms up and like reaching around the tree. And I was thinking about, that's definitely like when you're looking at clear prints, right? It's such a subtle. It could be such a subtle difference between like various speeds, let's say, like slight changes in gait, right? Can be like there could be a big change in movement that's not necessarily reflected as a large change in the way the tracks look, right? But with and understanding that can be hard, and usually one of the tools you use is to like walk through or crawl through what you see, right? So when you're sign tracking, there's like a more dynamic bit of evidence to go off of, because you have like where the tracks were at, like on the tree, right, where the actual footprint was on the tree, but then like how the environment in that exact specific scenario affected the animal's movement, so it's pretty easy to like, even though we don't do that very often, like put your mind into the mind of a squirrel and like imagining, okay, it runs like this and it's on the tree and it's stopping and it's peeling back the bark like this, right? You have that bark to look at, you have like the tree to look at, it's a really great way to get into doing that, to mirroring what you're seeing, the tracks telling you about how the animal moved and interact with the landscape. And I love how the tracking or the sign tracking brings you onto the landscape more. I think obviously it's easy to look at a set of tracks and like picture how the animal was moving and picture the animal moving there. Obviously the landscape affects that, but with sign tracking, it's like something other than the actual footprint, right? That means you're finding evidence of something else on the landscape that caused that track to be there, whether that's like hair caught in a fence line from a deer ducking underneath it and scraping off those hairs, versus like somewhere where there was like a deer escaped from attack and you're finding a clump of hair that was pulled out by a mountain lion, let's say.
Right.
Yeah, just cool to learn about the landscape while you're learning about the animals, kind of like through each other.
Yeah, man, it's fun, and like it really, the more you embrace every little mystery that you find, and the more you really take the time to like notice all the disturbances, you sort of collect them, and then as the years go on, you might get to see the animals doing the things, or like watch a video of a squirrel ripping apart, like an acorn, or ripping apart a pine cone, and you start to see like, oh, that's exactly how they do that. And then when you find the sign, it all kind of clicks into place. Yeah, it really does round things out.
A friend of mine had he was teaching at a summer camp in South Jersey, and on his way to and from this, it was a museum. Anyway, he was on his way to and from there. He will go by this old, this is a pretty old town, and it's like obviously one of the original structures in the town, but like kind of half in ruins. And he went up in there, and it was just lined with skulls of various types of rodents of like all different types and shapes and sizes. And it was a couple of barn owls that lived up on the edges of the roof right there, and with their regurgitating whole skulls, he had this like fantastic collection of like every small rodent that lived in the Northeast, and it was such a cool thing for having for sign tracking, for finding gnawings, like random gnawings in the woods, because all kinds of different rodents will gnaw on bones just to get that in their diet, and to be able to like bring the bone over to the skull collection and be like, oh, hey, check this out. This is actually like a shrew that's chewing on this right here, not a mouse that's chewing on this right here. Because look, the skull fits right into those two teeth. So yeah, if you have a spot where an owl is regurgitating pellets, really great thing to have is the skull there, especially for investigating chews, feeding sign. It's a great tool to have, are those skulls.
Yeah, what I find a lot around here is there'll be a hole in a tree, and the tree will be trying to close it, and then a rodent will be chewing it open again. And that's measuring those teeth marks is one of the best ways that I can tell, like, is this a red squirrel, a flying squirrel, or a mouse? And like that's super helpful. Yeah, having skulls is great, or even like having pelts. If you find fur in the woods, being able to bring it back to a pelt and compare it directly to it is awesome. And a lot of animals, like, if you really start to look at their fur, the way that they look on the outside of their body is so different than the way that individual hairs look, that it really makes a big difference to be able to like compare. And the other way is having a fur journal where you just like find a roadkill animal, take a little bit of hair from each part of the body and tape it in and label it, and that's another good reference. But if you get into tanning and you get into tanning pelts, having those pelts around is just like, it saved my butt a bunch of times in terms of IDing fur.
I did those fur journals, and then like I feel like just by doing the fur journal, I never had to look up any of those furs ever again. Just like spending that time with it, putting it in the journal. I mean, I still have a couple of those journals. Like, pretty cool to open them up, but I realized that I've never needed to look at that again, just because that one time, which is cool. It's like something to remember for learning all this stuff, just going through that act of journaling about it can help you remember it, even if you're not going to like use it for a reference material.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, we were trailing this bobcat during a winter tracking class, and it had killed something, but we found it dragging it before we found like the kill site where it had actually done the killing. And we just saw it dragging it, and it was like every third step, stepping on the animal and pulling some hair out. Like, if you're crawling with a poncho on, you like catch yourself. It was doing that, except with this animal it was dragging. It was leaving these hairs that were like white, black, tawny, and gray. And it was cat. Like, this could be any animal. What's that?
Somebody's cat.
Well, it turned out to be a gray squirrel tail.
Oh yeah,
but it was
that
like
makes sense.
Yeah, but it was one of those things where like when I looked at it exactly, I was like, "What the hell is this? Like, this is every color that animals in the forest here are." Like, and then we backtrailed it all the way to where it had killed it, and then it was obvious that it was a gray squirrel. And man, it had like chased it, and then done this 90-degree or 180-degree turn and leapt like 12 feet directly onto it to kill it. It was, I mean, for a tracking class to be able to find that, it was so glorious.
Pretty epic.
Because sometimes you're just like, it's been raining and there's not much to look at. And sometimes you see bobcats killing things, and then I even had one class where that same bobcat ran in front of the class at like 2 p.m, and everyone in the class saw this bobcat. And then we went down to the river where it had come from and found like 150 clear prints of it walking along the river. They were like, nice. Did you stage this?
Nice. Yes, I didn't. It was not at all. Totally. Every year. Come again.
Release the bobcat.
No, I like to trap my bobcats alive. It's more feisty that way.
Yeah.
Super lucky. When I was thinking about like talking about some of the sign that I'm finding here, it's like a lot of it is like transplanted animals, like deer sign, seeing the same thing. I started thinking about like all the sign that you find in the ocean. It's like such a different kind of beast because I mean, I guess you will find more of a certain type, like you're going to find more, skate eggs, or not skate, but ray eggs and shark eggs and the like on beaches that have more of them. But it's like the ocean, stuff can be floating in from all over the freaking place. But definitely finding like skulls and skeletons washed up on the beach, like they're usually not going to go but so far because they're heavy enough to hit the bottom. Obviously, like stuff gets pushed by current, but yeah, there's definitely some stuff that you can like see on a seashore to tell you a little bit about the life that you're going to find that's in the ocean right there. Obviously, like again, it can come from further away, but
when you're diving, have you ever found parrotfish feeding sign? Like bites out of coral?
I haven't spent the time looking for that, honestly. Most of the underwater tracking that I'm doing is actually in the sand for conch and for sand dollars, and sand dollars are in the urchin family, so different types of urchin. You could see where their tracks are actually at. Obviously, like the goatfish, where they are digging into they're digging in their burrows. They're like picking up, purposely tossing out little bits of small coral, dead coral, or like picking it up from other places and like making a rubble field. Octopus are pretty easy to see by their sign, like the way they put shiny stuff in a collection of stuff right outside of their main denning sites. But no, I haven't really specifically found parrotfish sign, but now I'm gonna definitely be doing that because I've seen them feeding. Like I've seen them actively
Right.
I've seen them actively feeding, but no, and I've seen them pooping. And but I do appreciate that about the ocean. It's like it's giving you clues, but there's a lot to read through. There's a whole lot to read through.
Totally. Yeah, that's funny. I mean, like around here, the pumpkin seeds will make little burrows, and you can find like all these pock marks if you're ever diving in or like looking around in a pond.
The pumpkin seeds,
cool
I'm
stuff.
assuming that's a type of fish, right?
They're like kind of look like sunnies.
Yeah, and they make their little beds, their nests that they lay their eggs in. Yeah,
Totally.
a lot of fish that do that here too.
Yeah. That's cool. Underwater tracking. We see a lot of beaver sign underwater.
I never even really thought about that, but yeah, I guess a ton of their sign is underwater.
Yeah, their scat is almost always underwater, and it's like there's one spot where I can pretty reliably find it at the end of this beaver dam, and I'll usually bring classes there to like peer in the water and see if we can find little sawdust nuggets. And
if you need easy
but
tracking.
their sign is like pretty great for teaching sign tracking in general.
Yeah, I mean,
because
if
there's
you
so
need
much
easy
of it,
tracking,
and there's
like,
heavy drags, and their lodges are huge, their dams are huge, their feeding signs super obvious.
Oh yeah.
So that
and
you'll
really, never mistake
key.
You'll never mistake a beaver's freaking trail, like where they're
for sure.
Yeah, like a beaver's trail where they're dragging freaking logs through the woods. You're never gonna mistake that trail for anything else, right? I mean, yeah, that's like a whole world of sign in and of itself there. Just like the massive amount of, work that they're doing, putting into managing their landscapes the way they do. Pretty freaking nuts.
And their clear prints used to confuse the hell out of me when I first started tracking, because usually you just get those in the rears, you get those three bigger fingers, and then that's it. And it's like, the hell is a three-fingered animal? And then their body drags out the middle.
Yeah, like where they're everywhere that they're going on land. Not everywhere, but most everywhere they're going on land, they're dragging stuff with them besides their freaking tail. Like, that's the whole... And it makes a lot of sense when you think about why they're building the dams in the first place, which is so that they can spend more time in the water where they're safer rather than on land where they're big freaking clunky, like, bulldozers. Yeah, definitely freaking crazy animals. Pretty hardcore. And beavers.
Yeah, we got a bunch of them here.
Yeah, like, fairly reliable to have strategies to hunt them, Like, you're not going to know where to be. Lots of fat on them too. Ooh, man.
Yeah, a lot of people trap them in the winter here.
When they're at their fattest. Yeah, for their fur too.
Yeah, and they got 1 or 2 exits out of the water, and because everything's iced over, so you just trap those holes, and people do pretty well off it.
Yep. Well, I mean, any time of year, you can bust open their dam and wait there for them to come and fix it. It's like pretty decent strategy right there.
Yeah.
Kind of rude, but whatever. You got to eat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Other things I guess I wanted to say about learning, like how I learned sign tracking, just so much paging through field guides and just getting like the search images in my head of what even is possible to be sign, and like just getting that resource of looking at all the different possibilities. And it never looks like it does in the book, or it's very rare that you see sign that matches up to exactly what you looked at in the book, because everything's so species dependent and regional dependent in terms of what they're actually eating. But just starting to get that like imagery in your mind as to what could be looked for. The other thing I would say that really helped me is watching animals firsthand and then going and looking at the sign they left behind. So like sit spots in New England, you're probably going to see a squirrel, and you could be like, oh, it's just a squirrel, or you could be like, I'm going to find the claw marks that thing left going up that tree, you know, and watch it go up the tree and where it went up. And then you start to notice like, oh, it goes up the same way every time. Then you start to notice, oh, I can't even find claw marks because this whole thing is claw marks, and what I'm noticing is a bark discoloration where it's climbed this tree, you know, 25 times a day, every day for the last 2 years. And so you like building up that arsenal of things by direct observation and not letting those direct observation opportunities go to waste, I think is a big way too that I learned sign tracking.
Yeah, it's interesting living somewhere where there's no collection of information on the various sign and tracks that there are.
I hear you not, Matthew.
Well, that's okay. I'm just forging forth anyway, though you can't hear me. Everything's good.
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
So now you got to edit that all out. Anyway, it's
no,
interesting. Oh, is it? Oh, I gotta love the delay. Woo, delay. Anyway, yeah, it's interesting living somewhere where there's no like storehouse of all the knowledge of sign that there is that you might encounter here, right? Like, how are you going to prepare yourself to study for such a random collection of animals that we find here? So, you know, I always fall back on just like, you know, knowing the animals like in general when you're going into places that you don't know, or places where you don't have a reliable field guide for. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about, as we're having this conversation, all the various sign that's left behind by iguanas, and there's no field guide that I've ever seen that really shows that much. You know, like, I guess I could be out there looking for iguana videos, but it's never really captured my interest. But definitely interesting to like see the difference between like test holes versus like actual holes where they're laying at the time that they're laying, like even just like how much you're seeing their tracks on the beach, and you know, like how much you're seeing like the damage to the trees changing as they're using this just as their sunning platform or using it for their feeding area. Like it's been nothing but exactly what you're talking about, like firsthand experience, just watching the animal make that track and then going and finding it. Yeah, and it's definitely like been interesting study for me, like telling the difference between goat and deer by their sign. Obviously, like, you know, the actual brows doesn't look much difference, but just like the sheer amount of it and like, you know, how much rougher they are on the foliage. Like, you know, you're not going to find that many places where a deer has pulled so hard on a tree branch that it's like breaking down tree branches, but it's definitely like a normal part of sign that you find in areas that are not even have heavy amounts of goats, but just like any goats feeding in there, like how much rougher they
they're
are on the
just
landscape.
dicks.
Dude, they tear it up. Like, it's not okay that they left a tiny little nub of noni leaf. They want to, like, rip the noni leaf off completely off the tree, like with the whole branch, to make sure that little nub didn't get away. Oh, yeah, it's crazy. Like, such a sign-heavy animal right there. Crazy. Yep.
Dude, you know what I learned about chipmunks from reading Ash, a book about them? Is that they'll dig their main den for the winter, and then they'll dig a secondary exit, and then they'll go around and close and camo their first exit or entrance so that the throw pile, like the pile of dirt that they made when they made their den, doesn't give away their location. Which is just mind blown just reading this little kid's book and being like, what?
I wonder how track aware animals are of other animals. Like, you're talking about an animal with like a, tiny brain, so like less processing ability than other animals, which honestly I don't think that's like the whole picture of intelligence. But anyway, like an animal that in theory doesn't have but so much capacity for like understanding the workings of the world, but obviously they're like self-track aware. How track aware are they of other animals? Like, definitely some sign, obviously, like scent marking is a sign, so like any animal could be aware of that, right? So like they have to be somewhat track aware of some sign, I would think. Definitely sign more likely than footprints. Obviously they're not like out there discerning a bobcat's footprint from a freaking neighborhood dog's footprint, but the sign, I don't see why other animals wouldn't be like highly aware of that.
Yeah, I think the world of scent is huge for them. I think if we as a species had any doorway into that, we would have such a broader view of the wild.
Well, what's crazy, we kind of do, we just don't pay attention to other animals' scent as often as we possibly could.
Yeah, but I've never smelled like the interdigital odor of an animal.
Well, why the hell not, Brad? Get in there.
I guess maybe a cat when it stepped on my face.
Oh, is that what it did? Yeah. Great. Glad to know it. You weren't like in there pushing its digits aside.
Just snipping paws.
Get over here, Fluffy. You know where I like to smell you. Definitely something we haven't really talked about much, but obviously that people maybe do some, but not, I don't think, enough of, is sign tracking other human beings. We tend to do it when it's pretty obvious, or when it's time to figure out who accidentally picked up my phone and put it over there. Whatever people end up sleuthing out, but the world of human sign, such a blatant and obvious and usually easy to figure out kind of world there. But definitely, one of the things that I spend a lot of time doing when, trying to keep my awareness beyond just what I can see and hear and, directly sense in the moment, but always paying attention to tracking, even when you're in a cityscape. People leave some funky sign out there. Usually I'm not scat testing, but I've even seen that on the streets before.
Oh yeah, now that's common. I mean, we use it a lot in the tracking class, the scout tracking class, especially, and scout classes in general, target indicators, finding, student trails, finding their bedding areas, finding. If anyone brings ghillie or wears or uses ghillie, that's there's tracks from that, sign from that all over the place. Where people have eaten, people almost always leave some sort of sign of what they've eaten. Oh yeah,
plenty. Well, when you're sign tracking humans, you realize just how freaking greasy we are.
Or if they're camoing up with mud and clay, you can find carryover of that, or where they've gathered it. Yeah. Or totally. People they try and counter track stuff by cutting foliage.
But
then they don't counter track the cutting of the foliage. So
one of my it's one of the things that makes counter tracking my best friend, worst enemy right there. Every time I do it, I'm like, now it's just spread more. Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tough.
I mean, the better you become at sign tracking, the more aware you become at the sign that you're leaving, and then you really like get better at not leaving as much sign.
Yep.
Because
makes you want to go on a degreasing mission.
Or you just want to leave so much sign that it's just too confusing to deal with. Like,
there you go.
That's what we do in the winter. Like if it's easy to follow me, then at some point I'm going to run in circles in all directions and make such a goddamn mess that
at least
it's at least going to slow you down.
Slowing the person down. That's about it.
Yeah. But you can slow somebody way down, and if they're trying to catch up to you, then man, every minute that you get them waylaid makes a difference.
Snow, rough stuff right there.
Yeah.
Kind of like beaches. Yes. Other than the fact that you can get in the water. I said kind of like beaches, other than the fact that you can get in the water.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you can take a boat or a swim.
Yep, but man, snow, that's tough. Counter tracking, good night. Not possible.
We've played with it a lot, and like it really is all about either sneaking into a pre-existing context, like they're all using snowshoes, we'll use snowshoes or skis or whatever, or then like I said, making such a big mess, or traveling in places you don't expect people to be moving, or traveling during the snow, so that your like tracks are just getting whited out right away. Traveling in high wind areas. There's ways of pushing it. One student group one year tricked us really well. They had like they used a main trail that was heavy use, so it was all packed. And then they took a spot where it looked like somebody stepped off to take a piss, and they pissed there. And then there was like a very sneaky way of stepping from there over and into super thick balsam firs, which are like Christmas trees. And they had their entrance to their like a big thicket that they wove their way through, and then their campsite was in the middle of that. And we found it eventually, but we definitely walked by it a lot of times and dismissed it as like, oh, it's just a piss spot, until it started to, like, the trail leading to it was too worn down, and it was like, the people aren't peeing here that much.
Nice.
But yeah,
it's great. It's great, all the things you get to learn from students.
They're occasionally smart.
Yep. Well, the thing I like most about students is that when there's a whole bunch of them around, the ticks get on them instead of me. It's brilliant. Thank you, my little tick magnets. Welcome to the Pine Barrens. I'm going to follow right behind you. Oh, classico. So what do you got going on? Everything? Is your everything starting?
Yeah, we got all sorts of stuff going on. We just did black ash basketry this last weekend. I should have brought my basket down. I forgot.
Oh, what's wrong with you?
I actually got to make
down?
A basket.
Jeez.
It was nice to be humbled by a skill and be like, oh great, I don't know, like I just completely suck at this. I'm hand dumb. I don't know what I'm doing with this. It came out pretty well. Black ash basketry is pretty cool in that like a lot of it's carving. So
yeah,
it's a lot of woodworking to like.
Well,
make
you're
the
carving down you're not pounding out your splints, or
no,
you are, but
no,
you're just
making
carving
your
as well.
splints. But then you're carving your handle and your rim, and like we will like shave the outside of all the splints so that they're smoother, and and then the weaving part's pretty easy compared to like all the processing.
That was great. Can you not edit that burp out?
I'm not editing that fucking burp out. I don't have time for that shit.
You see how much he cares, people?
They happened. See if you can sign track it.
It smells like you were drinking Dr. Pepper.
Smells like death. Yeah, but that was cool. It was a fun class. And then, yeah, we're right into, like, more black ash, more basketry, survival classes, our scout classes in a couple months. So I'm starting to, like, get the crew together for that. It always takes more planning. Tracking class coming up. Yeah, we're just, this time of year, we're crazy busy.
I know, right?
And you're about to head to the mainland,
north.
right?
Yep, that's right. Got the Tom Brown Jr. Memorial, and then we'll see after that. Who knows? I don't know. It might be a little. Yeah, it's wintertime is really our busy season, honestly. Like, that's when we run most of our classes. Definitely, like, it's so cool to spend so much time in an area, like, so deeply interacting with it, like doing numerous survival trips in an area through the whole winter season, like, kind of being out there enough to, like, really feel it through the seasons, but having it be spread out over such a long period of time to, like, see all the changes. Definitely interesting seeing the goats get smarter and smarter every year. Kind of smarter and smarter goats. Every year. Yeah, like the dumb is always there, just enough. Thankfully, it's fun, you know, like it's definitely fun to take, like, rank kids who have no idea what they're doing and at least get them to see the animals. It's, like, pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be headed up to the Pine Barrens pretty soon here to do some teaching. But yeah, I pulled this thing out and I knew that you didn't like this for a long time. This is a piece of wood I started on. I was, like, thinking about when I started on this piece of wood. It was a full-on 20 years ago I started carving down this piece of Osage orange right here.
Damn.
I think we were actually hanging out at one point, like, during a class, and I was carving on this very same piece of wood. In fact, you might have actually been sitting there when I, like, put these pencil marks in this one spot and wrote no. Oh, can I get it on the camera? No, not there. No, don't carve me. Anyway, yeah, I was just going through some old pieces of wood and slapped a whole bunch of sinew on this not too long ago. And now the sinew's dried and it's about to get this snake skin. And yeah, we'll see how it comes out. But I can tell already that you don't like that.
I don't. You know, I know something you don't know is that you can make a hat out of palm leaves.
Oh! Look at this! Look at you
here in the Northeast.
Last minute. Do I have anything cool to show
here
people?
In the Northeast, we have palm.
What do I have?
Magical plant that creates coconuts. You can make hats out of it.
Very, very stylish, Brad.
That are much too small for my head.
This is also a fashion accoutrement like Brad. It's just a fake mustachio.
And this is a piece of black palm that I stole from you.
My last piece.
Many, many years ago.
You know, actually, what I was just working on was planing out a piece of black palm for I'm gonna back a bow with it. I'm gonna do a like a laminate on some bunchberry. But yeah, it was interesting because, you know, like, the shape of that wood and the way the grain is doesn't do very well with a hand planer. Like, as you're running the one way, like, it catches really hard on the node. So I actually did it with a rasp, and it's not perfectly flat, but, like, when I clamp it, I can clamp it totally flat. So definitely interesting trying to flatten something without the tools that you would usually use.
Yeah, man. That's
dang, is that
stuff.
it?
Yeah, man.
Is that all we got?
Sign tracking.
That's right. Yep.
And
so yeah.
Hit us up with more questions. We're happy to cover topics or answer questions.
Yep.
And we'll see every other week, at least until fall, and then it'll be.
And then we'll see.
Getting back to the weekly.
All right.